He called her mom, then begged for forgiveness and a slice of the trust he'd already stolen. Janet didn't flinch, just slid a framed quote across the table. "Respect is not retroactive." The hidden cameras caught his face fall, his apology curdle. By sunrise, his accounts were frozen, his marriage erased, and his lies entered into evidence. And the woman he once called mother? She was now the reason he'd stand trial. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The ballroom smelled like roses and money. Too many centerpieces, too much white. Janet McAllister sat at the edge of the reception hall near the floral archway, tucked away at the mother of the groom table that might as well have been the back row at a theater. Her name wasn't on any place card. The linen napkins were a different fold at her table, as if the staff had forgotten and corrected it halfway through. Claire's family filled the front tables, all smiles and sterling silver cufflinks. Janet sipped club soda and said nothing. She had worn navy, tasteful, not flashy. Her heels were low, her posture perfect. After 30 years teaching literature, she'd learned how to hold a room without making noise. But this wasn't her room. It hadn't been for a long time. Nathan looked polished, charming, all angles and curated charisma. His tie was undone just enough to look relaxed for the photos. Claire shimmered beside him, every movement planned to fall within an Instagram crop. Their friends raised glasses like it was a tech launch. Janet saw maybe 3 familiar faces in the crowd. When the toast began, she almost missed it. A clinking of glasses, the rise of phones, and Nathan standing near the DJ booth with a microphone and a confident grin. "I just want to thank everyone for coming." "And of course," he said, eyes scanning the room before pausing, too long, on her. "The woman who raised me." Janet straightened her spine, fingertips resting gently on the tablecloth. Nathan continued, his voice syrupy and smooth. "She taught me discipline, made sure I did my homework, packed my lunches, even when things got hard after Dad died. She gave up a lot so I could be here today." A few polite nods. A woman in a lavender dress whispered, "Sweet." Nathan's smile widened. "But if I could give one piece of advice to my new wife, it'd be this. Don't become her." Laughter. Not loud, but sharp. The kind that pokes ribs. That says, he didn't mean it that way. Did he? Janet didn't blink. The ballroom blurred, guests exchanging glances, Claire hiding a smirk behind her champagne glass. Janet felt her fingers curl slightly, not in rage but precision. She stood slowly, walked toward the mic. The air shifted, even the DJ stepped back. "Nathan," she said, taking the mic from his surprised hands. "You're right." A beat. "I did raise you. I raised you through night shifts and overdraft fees, through pneumonia and piano lessons. I raised you while burying your father, and I did it without ever once asking the world to clap." Gasps. A waiter froze mid-pour. She looked out across the stunned faces. "And I'll leave you with just one truth, since this seems to be the place for speeches." She turned slightly toward Claire, but her eyes didn't linger. "You didn't marry beneath you, dear. You married unfinished." Then she handed the mic back like she was returning a library book. Silence reigned. Even the string quartet didn't resume. Janet walked out of the ballroom, her heels clicking sharp against the tile like punctuation marks. She didn't look back. Outside, the air was thick and humid, Charleston in full summer bloom. She stood alone beneath the porch light, exhaling slowly. 15 years earlier, she'd stood in a grocery store aisle counting quarters to buy cold medicine for Nathan, who'd cried all night from fever. She'd pulled double lectures, tutored on weekends, let the furnace stay off in December just to keep his tuition paid, every birthday cake homemade, every permission slip signed. And still, don't become her. Inside the cab ride home, her phone buzzed. A notification from Claire's public Instagram. "Family is what you choose. We chose honesty over history." Janet didn't reply, but something in her, something dormant, finally lit. And it wasn't rage, it was intention. The wedding program lay curled at the edge of Janet's coffee table, crumpled like something that had already begun to forget itself. She hadn't looked at it during the ceremony. too busy watching the back of Claire's veil ripple in the coastal breeze like a flag someone had stolen. But now, 2 days later, under the dim light of her Charleston kitchen, she smoothed it open with steady hands. Page 1. Claire's parents, listed in full, Dr. and Mrs. Williamson Rhodes IV. A paragraph about their philanthropic work. Page 2. The wedding party, all 13 members. Janet wasn't there, not even a passing mention. Her name, her presence, her decades, they had been edited out. She poured herself a glass of Pinot Grigio and sat. It hadn't happened all at once, this erasure. Claire had chipped away gently, the way you loosen paint with a fingernail until the whole wall starts to peel. At first it was missed calls, then, we're so busy. Then, you wouldn't understand. Things are different now. Janet had understood more than they thought. She'd seen it in Claire's clipped tone every holiday, her refusal to let Nathan spend more than one night back home. Claire's need to always be right, to always be praised, to always be positioned as the one who saved Nathan from something. From her. Janet reached for the accordion folder she kept in the cabinet above the fridge. Labeled in black Sharpie, Nathan, education, medical, legal. The stack was thick, every receipt and document a brick in the castle he stood on. Tuition bills she'd paid in full with Charles's life insurance after the accident. The private therapist he'd seen in high school when he stopped speaking for 6 weeks. Co-pays, campus deposits, groceries during grad school. The wedding gift she never gave, because he never registered for it. Because Claire had emailed her directly. We're keeping it simple. No gifts, please. And still, he stood at that mic, like she had never held the world up on her back, just to keep him steady. She slid the files back into the folder and took a breath so deep her ribs ached. Then she stood, grabbed her bag, and drove across town to the law office she hadn't visited in 3 years. Martin Langston still wore his ties too tight and his glasses on a cord around his neck. He didn't ask questions when she sat down. I need to update my will, Janet said. He raised an eyebrow. And the previous heir designation? Nathan is no longer a beneficiary, she said, crisp as chalk on a blackboard. Remove him from the trust, from the life insurance, from all emergency access points. If he's tied to the condo deed, untie it. If the scholarship fund in Charles's name still includes him, erase him. Martin didn't speak for a long moment. Done, he said finally, and opened his laptop. By the time she left, it was close to sunset. Janet paused in the parking lot, watching the sky warm from peach to wine. A breeze picked up, brushing across her shoulders like the lightest kind of permission. Back at home, she made tea and opened her iPad. Claire's latest Instagram post had just gone live, a photo of the couple on a whitewashed dock, champagne flutes in hand, the caption drenched in faux spirituality. Sometimes healing means distance, sometimes growth means boundaries. We said goodbye to a toxic influence, and hello to peace. Over 4,000 likes. Janet stared at it for a long, silent minute. She didn't comment, didn't call Nathan. Instead, she opened a blank document on her laptop. At the top, she typed, "The price of inheritance, a personal reckoning." Then she typed one more line beneath it, "This is not about revenge, this is about record-keeping." And for the first time since the wedding, she smiled. Because stories, once written, become permanent. And she was just getting started. The thumbnail was unmistakable, Nathan in a tailored charcoal blazer, standing center stage in front of the glowing red TED letters. "Escaping Generational Negativity," the title read. Over 92,000 views. Janet clicked play. She didn't expect to finish the whole thing, but she watched every second. Nathan's voice had that same careful cadence he used when selling an idea he didn't quite believe himself. The crowd laughed when he wanted them to, nodded when he leaned into the microphone and said, "I grew up in a household that confused control for care. Encouragement was conditional. Praise had a price tag." Janet sat frozen. The mug in her hand went cold. She watched him pace the stage like he'd survived something, like he hadn't been read to every night until the 6th grade, like he hadn't been walked to school, rain or shine, even when she had pneumonia. like she hadn't stood in the school counselor's office begging for that last scholarship form to be considered when their heating had already been shut off. "And I realized," Nathan said, flashing a smile, "that to succeed, I had to stop seeking permission from the past." Janet closed the laptop slowly. Then she reopened it and forwarded the link to Veronica with a single line: "He's profiting off fiction." 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Veronica's reply came in capital letters: "You need to publish." Janet stood, not shaking, not storming, just moving with the certainty of a woman reclaiming her name. She pulled 3 boxes from the linen closet, mismatched lids, years of tax documents and financial records inside, every envelope she'd ever received from Sally Mae, every check written out to state registrar, every canceled payment from the months she'd had to split groceries and gas and hope. She spent the next 3 hours at her dining table with a highlighter in one hand and a yellow legal pad in the other. Column headers: tuition, rent, medical, miscellaneous. A note in the margin: includes graduation travel. She remembered the time he called sobbing from Boston because his apartment had a leak and he couldn't afford both rent and an Uber to the internship that might become a job. She remembered wiring him $300 without hesitation. She remembered that internship turning into a full-time role. No one clapped then. She hadn't needed them to. Later that week, she brought the box to Martin. He adjusted his glasses, frowning thoughtfully as he flipped through the folders. "This isn't just evidence," he said, tapping one of the printouts. "It's a ledger. It's a map." "Then follow it," she said, "and tell me where the deed really ends." He looked up. "You think he moved something?" "I think he borrowed certainty and called it generosity." Martin blinked. Then he opened a new file on his desktop and titled it McAllister:"Audit." Janet left the office, calm, focused. She wasn't chasing restitution, she was correcting the record. That night, she pulled out the old camcorder footage Charles had loved so much, digitized now, sitting in labeled files on her desktop. There was Nathan at age 6, holding a library certificate, grinning, gap-toothed. There he was again at 14, awkward and lanky, holding up a debate trophy while Janet clapped behind the camera. At 17, in the doorway, reading his college acceptance letter aloud through tears. And still, he stood in front of an audience claiming she'd been the weight tied to his feet. Her phone buzzed again. A new post. Claire, of course. A filtered image of the two of them hiking somewhere sunlit, with a caption that read, "We didn't break the cycle, we escaped it." Janet stared for a moment. Then she opened her draft. She added a new chapter title: Inherited Lies, The Price of Narrative Theft. And then in the margin, she wrote, "If truth is currency, he's in deep debt." Janet never received text alerts for her savings account. She didn't need them. Her balances didn't change often. She'd been meticulous since Charles passed. But that Tuesday morning, her banking app refused to log her in. "Session expired," it read. Then, "Credentials unrecognized." She tried again, and again. Then the screen blinked red. Too many failed attempts. Account temporarily locked. She stared at her phone, heart ticking faster. Not panicked, but focused, like the sharp inhale before delivering bad news to a classroom. She called the bank. The hold music was chirpy, unforgivably bright. When the agent finally came on the line, her voice softened when Janet gave her full name and account number. "Ma'am, it looks like there was a login from an unrecognized device yesterday afternoon. IP address traces back to Massachusetts." Janet's stomach sank. "I haven't left South Carolina in over a year," she said tightly. The agent hesitated. "There's also a linked user listed under a family proxy. Power of attorney authorization dated 2014. Janet closed her eyes. Nathan. She remembered the form. He'd needed it in college, just in case anything happened. Back when trust was assumed, not earned. She never revoked it. "I need to terminate that proxy immediately," she said, each word sharp and deliberate, "and I want a fraud block placed across every account attached to my name." "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "We'll initiate a review. You may also want to file a report with your local precinct." After she hung up, Janet didn't cry, didn't even sit. She grabbed a legal pad and a black pen and wrote at the top of the page, "The cost of trust." Then she dialed Veronica. "I need your eyes," she said. Veronica showed up with her reading glasses on a chain and a bottle of iced tea. Together they opened 6 months of statements. Savings, checking, the Roth IRA Charles had started before the diagnosis. "There," Veronica said, circling a $4,800 withdrawal from 3 months earlier. "Not your handwriting on that memo line." Janet leaned in. It said, "Wellness Retreat Advance." Claire had posted about a retreat, mountains, matcha smoothies. They kept going. Another $900 labeled consulting stipend. Then 2 small transfers to an account ending in numbers Janet didn't recognize. By sundown, they had found $13,245 unaccounted for. Not catastrophic, but coordinated. Janet opened a new Excel sheet. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, memo. Column D, not mine. She titled the file, "What He Owes." She paused for a long moment before clicking save. Then she opened a separate folder titled Legal Revocations and scanned the old power of attorney document into a new PDF. Revoked. Effective immediately. She emailed it to Martin. Subject line: "We're tightening the perimeter." Later that night, as she loaded the dishwasher, her phone buzzed again. Claire's newest story. A blurry photo of Nathan holding a coffee mug on a sun-drenched patio. The caption read, "Trust isn't given. It's inherited by the worthy." Janet didn't respond. She simply powered off her phone and went back to her laptop. Line by line, she added every unexplained charge. In the final column, she typed, "Don't say I didn't raise you well. You just learned how to take, not how to earn." She printed the sheet and placed it in a new folder marked in bold red ink, AMMUNITION. Then she poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her patio window, watching the Charleston night settle like a velvet curtain. Out there, Nathan still thought he owned parts of her life. In here, she was drafting the bill. And next time he logged in, he'd find more than a locked account. He'd find a mother who had finally read the fine print and was ready to sue. Martin called on a Thursday. "He filed a restraining order," he said flatly, as if relaying the weather. "Alleges emotional harassment, claims you've been disruptive to his marriage and professional image." Janet stared at the phone in her hand, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity. Then her breath slowed, measured, focused. "I assume you're drafting a counter," she said. "Oh, I've already drafted the first blow," Martin replied. "I've got documentation ready. Everything you handed me, unauthorized withdrawals, account logs, the revoked power of attorney. But the real diamond?" A rustle of paper on his end. "Public records. Your Roth IRA was partially liquidated last fiscal quarter. Those funds were deposited into an LLC, one registered under Nathan's name. Startup capital for something called Legacy Forward. It's a consulting firm." Janet barked out a short laugh. "Oh, it gets worse," Martin continued. "Guess who's listed as co-founder?" She didn't have to ask. Claire. Janet hung up with a promise to sign everything within 24 hours. Then she sat at her laptop, opened a clean document, and typed out a title she hadn't dared to say aloud before, "Mother, Not Monster." The essay was part confession, part chronology, part surgical autopsy. She detailed the theft in stages: financial, emotional, familial, how it had started with just a few signatures and ended with identity erosion. She didn't name Nathan outright, but anyone paying attention would know. She used metaphors like a scalpel. Her words bled truth in italics. She wrote through dinner, through midnight. By sunrise, she hit publish. The post went live on a quiet corner of Medium, tagged only with #elderfraud, #parenthood, #financial abuse. She expected maybe a handful of readers, a few polite comments, closure. She got a tsunami. Within 48 hours, it had over 80,000 reads. Comments flooded in from mothers, grandmothers, even adult siblings. One wrote, "I paid for my daughter's PhD. She calls me toxic now." Another, "My son took over my accounts to help. I live in a basement apartment. He drives a Tesla." Veronica called, halfway crying, halfway triumphant. "Janet, You opened the damn floodgates. Janet watched the shares tick upward. Reddit, Facebook, Twitter. Mother Not Monster trended regionally. Someone turned her line into a graphic. I gave him a future. He took my past. It was reposted on 3 legal advocacy pages by Friday. By Monday, a civil suit had been filed. Janet McAllister versus Nathan McAllister and Claire Rhodes. Allegations: elder financial exploitation, unauthorized fund misappropriation, power of attorney abuse. The press reached out, quietly at first, an email from a mid-tier parenting podcast, then an inquiry from a reporter at the Post and Courier. Janet declined interviews for now. The silence wasn't fear, it was curation. She spent her evenings refining every receipt, every email, every social media timestamp. She highlighted the message Claire had once sent. Don't worry, we'll take care of things, you don't have to be involved. She printed it, framed it, labeled it, Exhibit A. Martin updated her on the court response. Nathan's legal team claimed the funds had been voluntarily entrusted for joint ventures, but their timeline wobbled under scrutiny. We're building something solid, he said, not just to win. To expose that night, Janet walked into her study and opened the fireproof lockbox. Inside were old letters from Charles, including one she hadn't touched in years, dated 3 weeks before his death. She opened it, hands steady. Jan, don't let the world use your heart like a debit card, especially not our son. Make him earn every access point, every line of trust. I know you want to believe he'll always do right, but don't build his future with your erasure, please. Janet folded it back carefully. Then she picked up her phone. Another alert. Nathan had posted a statement. The public doesn't know the full story. Some people weaponize motherhood like martyrdom. She didn't respond. She simply updated the blog post. At the bottom, she added one new sentence. If you're going to accuse me of martyrdom, be prepared to learn what resurrection looks like. The post went viral again, and from a cold, curated corner of a Charleston suburb, a woman once erased was now impossible to ignore. The email arrived at 2:14 a.m., time-stamped, silent. Devastating. Martin had forwarded the full forensic audit with one subject line: confirmed transfers. Rhodes. Claire A. Janet sat up in bed and opened the file in the glow of her iPad. There it was. Claire's name attached to not 1, not 2, but 6 direct transfers from Janet's investment accounts. One labeled consulting prep, another simply read brand dev fee, but it was the third one that sealed it. $7,200. Reimbursement, bridal expenses. The screen lit up her glasses, but her face stayed stone. She got out of bed, made tea, and started organizing. There was no panic now, just an administrative calm sharpened by betrayal. She opened her legal binder, began slotting in not just receipts, but screenshots. Claire bragging in a group chat about funding the wedding ourselves. Claire texting Nathan, she'll never know, it's digital dust. Janet compiled it all: statements, captions, emails, call logs. She even clipped the audio file from a voicemail Claire had left her months ago, the one where she'd said, giggling, I mean, she has it. Why shouldn't we use it? Martin met her at the courthouse the next morning with a look that blended disbelief and admiration. I've worked fraud for 30 years, he said, stacking the folder. But this is operatic. He filed the criminal report under elder financial exploitation and unauthorized asset manipulation. The news broke within hours. It started on legal blogs, then Reddit, then the local Charleston ABC affiliate ran a 30-second segment. By sundown, raw Justice for Janet was trending in 3 states. Nathan, unsurprisingly, struck back. He released a public statement through his attorney. These accusations are fabricated. We're dealing with a woman who cannot distinguish truth from trauma. My wife and I are victims of a narrative being weaponized by a bitter parent who refuses to let go. Janet didn't respond directly, but the internet did. Twitter split down the middle. One side called her brave, the other vindictive. Her inbox filled with both sympathy and threats. Someone mailed her a torn wedding invitation with "Mother equals monster" scribbled across it in red pen. She kept it in a drawer, next to the first ultrasound photo she'd ever taken of Nathan. People are choosing sides like it's reality TV, Veronica muttered over tea. But they forget one thing. What's that? You're not the villain, Veronica said. You're just finally narrating your own story. That night, Veronica helped her rehearse a live stream. It would be simple. No makeup team, no lighting crew, just Janet, a desk lamp, and the documents stacked high beside her. She hit record. The opening line, "My name is Janet McAllister. I'm a retired literature professor. And I didn't raise a criminal, he raised himself." She held up her folder, turned the pages, displayed each one calmly, explained every transaction, every access point, every omission of consent. The video hit 100,000 views in under 18 hours. A grandmother in Tennessee posted her own story under the hashtag. A retired nurse from Chicago wrote, "I thought I was alone." Claire, meanwhile, scrubbed her Instagram clean. No captions, no comments. Just one photo left, her bridal portrait standing barefoot on a dock, staring out at water she thought she could control. At midnight, Janet got another email from an anonymous sender. No message, just an attached PDF titled Prenup Addendum, Clause C4. She clicked. It was a scanned document. Claire had added a clause to her prenup stating any inheritance tied to Janet's accounts would remain protected, even in the case of criminal investigation. Claire knew. She always had. Janet closed the file slowly. The smile that rose wasn't sweet. It was surgical, because now she knew what kind of enemy she was really dealing with, and she had no intention of losing the next round. Only escalating. The podcast studio was tucked behind a juice bar downtown, unassuming from the outside but professionally soundproofed inside. Janet hadn't been in a recording space since guest lecturing at a campus years ago. Back then, she'd read from Austen and Baldwin. Now she was reading from her life. The host was a woman in her 30s named Elise Harper, brisk, sharp-eyed, and surprisingly kind. Her podcast, Unquiet Women, had made waves for spotlighting stories most people preferred, stayed buried. "This is just a conversation," Elise said, adjusting Janet's mic. "We follow your lead. You stop, we stop. You want anything cut? It's gone." Janet nodded. No edits. Elise blinked, then hit record. They started slow. Background, teaching, widowhood, motherhood. Then came the disowning, the financial theft, the blog. "You called your post Mother, Not Monster," Elise said, leaning in. "Why that title?" "Because people forget that motherhood isn't a promise," Janet replied. "It's a contract, and mine was violated." Elise gave her space, then said softly, "You brought something to read." Janet reached into her leather tote and pulled out a yellowed envelope, edges worn. "My husband, Charles, died when Nathan was 10. 3 weeks before, he wrote this." She unfolded it, smoothing the creases. "I've never read it publicly, until now." The letter, written in Charles's tidy print, was short. "John, if our son ever forgets who carried him, remind him, not with guilt, with truth. If love is a debt, you've overpaid. Don't let grief silence you. Don't let kindness bankrupt you. And don't, under any circumstance, let our son turn your devotion into his currency." Janet looked up. Elise had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting this space." "I didn't," Janet said. "I trusted myself. Finally." From there, the conversation unfurled. She brought out Claire's texts, Nathan's false Ted quotes. Scanned copies of will drafts with red-inked notes, including one labeled "Removed for Cause." Each fact landed like a hammer on soft wood, clean, sharp, irreversible. The episode aired that Friday. By Saturday morning, the podcast site crashed from traffic. Reddit threads popped up dissecting the letter, debating every word. Twitter reposted the audio clip of Janet reading aloud, overlaying it with footage of women burning outdated power of attorney forms. Stand With Janet hit the national trending list by noon. One user wrote, "She gave him everything, and he used it like a weapon." Another, "My mom paid my way through graduate school. I'm hugging her tonight." By Monday, Claire lost 2 brand deals, one for a wellness supplement, the other for a luxury linen company. Screenshots of her past tweets mocking Janet surfaced like wreckage. Comment sections turned to firestorms. Janet watched it all unfold from her quiet Charleston condo, coffee mug in hand, glasses perched low. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't even smiling. She was witnessing what happened when silence ended. Elise called later that day. "We've never seen anything like it," she said. "We want to run a follow-up. Maybe a live-streamed panel on financial gaslighting. Would you?" "Yes," Janet said before Elise could finish. Veronica dropped by that evening with lemon cookies and her iPad. She pulled up a message from an elder law nonprofit in Arizona. "They want you to speak," she said. "Honorarium included. And look at this. Donor-backed." Janet flipped through the email, then closed it slowly. "This doesn't end in a speech," she said. "It ends in accountability. Then start writing the next one." Janet glanced toward her study, where the files still lay open. But just as she stood to go work, another alert came in. A short video. Leaked footage of Nathan. In a private Zoom with investors. He was laughing, relaxed, and saying, "Look, we leveraged her. She's old. Who's gonna believe her over me?" Janet didn't react. She simply copied the video file, labeled it Exhibit B, Arrogance is Admissible. Then she whispered, almost fondly, "Thank you, son." Because he'd just opened the next door himself, and she was walking through it armed. The envelope came certified, legal cream with bold black type. Nathan McAllister versus Janet McAllister. Civil complaint, defamation, invasion of privacy. Veronica read it first, then folded it carefully and handed it back like a priest passing a communion wafer. Janet didn't flinch, just said, "So we're here now." The deposition was scheduled for Thursday, 10th floor of the Charleston County Courthouse. Janet arrived in slate gray slacks, pearl studs, and the quiet confidence of a woman no longer willing to shrink. Nathan was already seated at the conference table, Claire beside him in a cream blazer, hair slicked back in a ponytail so tight it looked painful. His legal team occupied the right side. 3 suits, a paralegal, a nervous intern. Martin sat beside Janet, calm, eagle-eyed, with a red folder marked Exhibits, Timeline Verified. "Mrs. McAllister," the opposing counsel began, voice dripping condescension, "can you confirm whether you knowingly posted confidential financial data?" Janet leaned forward. "I can confirm that I posted verifiable facts. Nothing confidential about money siphoned from accounts I owned." They tried to rattle her, suggested she was acting out of spite, that she'd exaggerated, that perhaps at her age memory was porous. Martin slid a document across the table. "Notarized receipts from a decade of support," he said. "Tuition payments, lease cosigns, and therapy stipends. All time-stamped. All signed." Next came the medical affidavit, Charles's attending physician attesting that his life insurance had gone entirely to Janet, and subsequently Nathan's education fund. The judge's brow twitched. The opposing side looked suddenly paler. Then came the twist. Claire stood. No warning. Her chair scraped the floor loud enough to startle. "I need to leave," she said to no one in particular, her voice brittle. She didn't look at Nathan, didn't touch his shoulder, just gathered her bag and walked out, heels echoing like accusations. Nathan's mouth opened, but no words came. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Rhodes is a co-defendant. I expect she'll return." "She won't," Janet said quietly. "Claire only stays when the camera's flattering." The room didn't laugh, but it didn't breathe either. By the end of the day, the judge allowed discovery to proceed into Nathan's handling of joint assets, particularly Janet's property and retirement accounts. The defense's protest landed flat, undermined by the video, the withdrawals, the signed authorization revocation. "You're not just winning," Martin muttered on their way out. "You're rewiring the system." That night, back home, Janet received an email from a documentary producer based in New York. Subject line, "Mother Not Monster. Option Rights Inquiry." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she opened her podcast dashboard. Episode 21, The Cost of Being Called Bitter. Downloads, 1,014,329. Veronica called minutes later, breathless. "You cracked 1 million. People are listening, really listening." Janet sipped her tea. Then we'd better keep speaking. But just as she rose to log off, her inbox pinged again. A private message from Claire. Just one line. You were right. I thought I was marrying legacy. I married liability. No apology, no ownership. But it was something. Janet screenshot it, saved it to a folder labeled Cracks in the Mask. She stepped onto her patio, wrapped in a shawl as the Charleston sky painted itself into dusk. Out there, her son had weaponized her silence, but in here, she was curating the record. Brick by brick, fact by verified fact. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail transcription from Nathan's number. You've made your point. Stop before you ruin everything. Janet smiled as she deleted it. Because he still didn't understand. She wasn't ruining anything. She was rebuilding what he tried to erase, and the blueprints were already public. The offer arrived folded in a manila envelope, delivered by courier with the kind of urgency that implied desperation wrapped in formality. Janet opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything, not out of sentiment, but out of habit. Years of handling student essays and estate paperwork had taught her the value of clean lines and uncluttered evidence. Inside, a non-disclosure agreement. 5 pages typed in language so polished it almost gleamed. If she signed, the civil suit would vanish. Her name would stay off headlines. Nathan and Claire would withdraw all claims. No admission of guilt, no restitution, and no further mention of the matter. Ever. The offer came with a note. For the family's peace. Janet stared at that phrase for a long time, as if repetition might unlock logic. Peace wasn't built on suppression. It wasn't sustained by gag orders and sealed affidavits. It came from daylight, from hard truths named aloud, and from the permission to speak without begging for permission. She returned the envelope unsigned. Martin wasn't surprised. He didn't argue either. He simply adjusted his glasses and said, "Then we go full exposure." Days later, the leak happened. A cache of emails surfaced, attached anonymously to a watchdog advocacy group already tracking Janet's case. The messages were unmistakably Nathan's. In one, he wrote, "She won't last the year. Let her die bitter and broke." Another said, "We're just streamlining the estate early." The backlash was immediate. Claire's name vanished from every platform within 24 hours. No new posts, no explanations. The comment sections turned into graveyards of deleted opinions. She wasn't protecting Nathan anymore. She was protecting what little remained of her public standing. Janet, however, stepped into the light. Her first interview aired on a national morning show, quiet but deliberate. The hosts asked about betrayal, legacy, and regret. Janet wore navy again, the same shade she'd worn to Nathan's wedding. Her voice didn't shake. Her answers weren't rehearsed. They were lived. "I didn't raise a monster," she said, holding her hands calmly in her lap. "I raised a boy who mistook love for leverage. And when I stopped allowing the imbalance, he called it cruelty." The segment aired at 8:17 a.m. By noon, her inbox held over 900 emails. Strangers, supporters, survivors of similar thefts who had never dared to say their children's names aloud. One woman wrote, "I haven't spoken to my son in 8 years. I thought I was the only one." Another said, "Thank you for showing us we're not crazy, just exploited." The donations started small. A retired postal worker sent $10. A high school teacher in Nebraska offered $50. Then a group of mothers pooled a GoFundMe campaign labeled "For Her Courtroom Courage." It crossed $40,000 in 3 days. Janet tried to decline. Veronica overruled her. "Don't rob people of the right to stand beside you," she said. "You're not taking handouts, you're taking back the narrative." Then came the call from a nonprofit based in Minnesota. They worked with victims of elder exploitation, rarely in the spotlight, often ignored in public discourse. They had followed Janet's blog, her podcast, her case. They wanted to name their newest program after her, the McAllister Initiative, dedicated to helping women recover stolen autonomy and rebuild financial security after familial abuse. Janet said yes, not for the honor, but for the permanence, because if Nathan had taught her anything, it was that names mattered, and hers would no longer be a footnote in someone else's power grab. That night, her lawyer called with news that didn't need flourish. State Attorney's Office is reviewing Nathan's activity. The audit you provided, plus the emails, the video, it's enough for potential criminal charges. Janet said nothing for a moment. Then she nodded. Let me know when it's official. As she hung up, she opened her study window. The Charleston air was warm, sweet with magnolia and possibility. Down the block, someone played piano faintly, halting notes, uncertain but sincere. Janet closed her eyes, not to rest, but to prepare, because silence had been expensive, and Nathan was about to learn just how much exposure could cost. The courtroom felt colder that day, either from the temperature or the anticipation that clung to the walls like condensation. Janet sat in the front row, calm but grounded, hands folded neatly in her lap as the judge flipped through the final ledger. Her posture hadn't changed since she'd walked in. She wore a deep forest green blouse, one of Charles's favorites from back when color meant celebration, not strategy. She didn't need to look at Nathan. He sat across the aisle, alone this time. His tie was knotted too tightly, his jaw set in that familiar clenched defiance that now read more like fear. The judge's voice was clear, each syllable deliberate. Given the evidence presented, both financial and testimonial, the court finds sufficient cause to approve the plaintiff's motion to revise all estate designations. Effective immediately, Mrs. McAllister is granted full right to formally disinherit Mr. Nathan McAllister. Additionally, the court will allow motion to pursue reversal of misallocated assets and initiate recovery proceedings on liquidated properties connected to joint holdings. There was a pause, a slight shuffle of papers. And lastly, this court issues a temporary freeze on all accounts associated with the defendant until the financial audit is complete. Gasps didn't echo in courtrooms the way they did in theaters, but silence did, and it settled thick and final around Nathan's shoulders like a closing door. Outside, the reporters had gathered early, microphones aimed like bayonets. Janet didn't speak to them. She walked straight to Martin's car, head held high, a statement unto herself. The headlines the next day spoke louder than anything she could have said. Mother disinherits son in landmark elder fraud case. Inheritance lockdown, judge rules in favor of financial justice. By the end of the week, Claire filed for annulment. No press release, no tagged photo, just a quiet petition submitted through her attorney's office with the checkbox marked fraudulent inducement and a sealed affidavit. Her Instagram account disappeared the same day. Janet didn't celebrate. Instead, she signed a different set of papers, nonprofit paperwork for a foundation in Charles's name. It had been something she and he once talked about in whispers, late at night when Nathan was still young and the world still felt pliable. They would call it the Charles Initiative, a grant and mentorship program for single parents pursuing higher education. It would start local, Charleston, Savannah, Raleigh. Eventually, maybe more, maybe national, maybe something that couldn't be erased with a TED Talk or a tech startup pitch. On the foundation's website, the mission statement was simple. This is not charity. This is returning the ladder someone tried to burn. Martin sent word that afternoon. Federal subpoenas were being issued. Nathan was to be investigated on charges of perjury, falsified asset reporting, and digital misappropriation of funds. A new team of forensic accountants had already been assigned to comb through every line item he ever touched bearing Janet's name. But it was the next invitation that hit different. It came from Washington, specifically from the Senate Subcommittee on Aging and Elder Protection. They had followed the story, listened to the podcast, and reviewed her court case. They wanted her testimony, on record, under oath, about how familial control could wear the face of love while moving like theft. They wanted her to help craft new legal protections, stronger ones built not just for the exploited, but for those too ashamed to speak. Janet sat in her study that night, looking over her speech draft. It didn't start with blame. It started with a memory. Charles holding Nathan's baby bottle while quoting Baldwin. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. She would quote that too, because now she was not just a mother, she was a precedent. Just as she stood to file the testimony, her phone buzzed. A message from Martin. State's filing formal charges in the morning. Criminal case incoming. Janet exhaled, not with relief, not with rage, but with the full weight of a chapter finally closing behind her, and the next one ready, pen uncapped, page wide open. The gala was held at the Charleston Historical Society, all marble staircases and golden sconces glowing like captured fire. Janet stood near the East Hall entrance in a long black gown with cap sleeves and a silver pendant Charles once bought her at a roadside antique shop. The kind of quiet detail that whispered, "I remember who I am." The Charles Initiative was being honored tonight. A year ago, she wouldn't have believed that possible, let alone stomachable. But now, as guests clinked glasses and murmured about policy and legislation, Janet stood composed, unblinking in the face of her own relevance. Halfway through the evening, a courier found her among the crowd. No envelope this time, just a folded piece of cream paper, handwritten in ink she recognized. She read it slowly. "Mom, if I can still call you that, please. One meeting, just you and me. No lawyers, no posts, just forgiveness. I miss you. I need to see you. Nathan." There was a time when a letter like that would have undone her, back when nostalgia was still tethered to hope. But now? It read more like a script, a performance designed to trigger muscle memory, not remorse. Janet folded the note in half and slid it into her clutch. Later that evening, back at home, she read it aloud to Veronica across the kitchen table. Her friend didn't hesitate. "This isn't healing," she said, pouring more tea. "It's hunting." "I know. So why meet him?" Janet looked out the window at the jasmine vines brushing the porch. "Because this time, I'm not the one unprepared." She made one call, to Elise, the podcast host, and within 24 hours, a private room at a downtown hotel was rented. 2 cameras, no mics on the table, nothing overt, just enough for record keeping. Janet arrived first. Nathan showed up 15 minutes late, dressed in slacks and a pressed button-down, his idea of contrition made visible. He looked thinner, grayer, the kind of tired that comes not from labor but consequence. He sat, said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "I was wrong." Janet waited. "I let Claire lead. I told myself it was for us, for our future. I never thought it would come to courtrooms and headlines and—" He exhaled sharply, like someone trying to jog through shame. "Mom, I'm sorry." Her expression didn't change. I need access to one of the trust accounts. Just one. To start over. I'm not asking to undo everything. Just a lifeline." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small frame, pushed it across the table. He looked down. The quote inside, printed in calligraphy, "Respect is not retroactive. You don't get to request what you refuse to give." He stared at it for a moment, blinked. Then his face changed, like paint cracking under heat. The apology curled at the edges, scorched by something colder. "You really won't help me?" Janet stood. The cameras caught everything. "Help is for those who fall," she said calmly, "not for those who dig." Nathan said nothing more. He left the room slower than he entered, like someone who finally realized the bridge behind them had burned before they even crossed it. Outside, the air was thick with summer coming in early. Janet didn't cry. She called Elise that evening and asked her to hold the footage, not for posting, not for revenge, just in case anyone ever asked if she gave her son a final chance, because she did, and he used it to ask for money, not mercy. At midnight, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line, "Family Bursar Transfer Request. Denied attached." A flagged transaction Nathan had attempted to initiate from a fund he no longer controlled. The bank blocked it, but they sent the record. Janet saved it quietly, labeled it "Final Withdrawal Attempt." Then she closed her laptop and turned off the light, because the door had closed, and this time she was the one who locked it. The notary came to Janet's home at precisely 10 a.m., carrying a briefcase full of finality. The papers were spread across the dining table like a quiet battlefield, clean, precise, weighty with intent. Janet wore a soft linen blouse and her hair in a simple twist, not for presentation but for control. She'd been waiting years for this kind of closure, not the kind that comes with apologies, but the kind you write into law. One by one, she signed the revocations. Power of attorney, rescinded. Medical access, terminated. Beneficiary rights, dissolved. She watched her own name shrink away from Nathan's, line by line, until there was no more tether. Not financial, not legal, not even medical. When she finished the final signature, she pressed the pen down firmly before setting it aside. The notary collected the documents with quiet efficiency, gave a respectful nod, and left. No ceremony, just the paperwork of emancipation. Martin called that afternoon to confirm it was done. Nathan McAllister is officially removed from all remaining accounts, trusts, and directives, he said. Your estate's full redirection has been recorded. Janet looked out the kitchen window as a breeze stirred the wind chimes. Redirected where? To the Charles Initiative, 90%, the rest into 2 grant funds, one for housing for single mothers, the other for adult women returning to higher education. Perfect, she said. By Friday, Nathan tried to retaliate. A post appeared online, a grainy, out-of-context home video clip of Janet scolding him at 16 over a failed exam. The caption, "She was never who you think." But the video didn't last long. Her legal team, already anticipating the move, issued an immediate takedown and cease and desist. The hosting platform removed it within 2 hours. What did surface next, however, came from Claire. She posted a public statement on her now reactivated account, a single black square with a caption that read, "I was manipulated. I believed what he fed me. I regret what I enabled. And I stand with every woman who's ever been used as a weapon in someone else's war." It was too late for redemption, but not for testimony. Claire agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and submitted her own affidavit. The charges against Nathan expanded to include digital fraud, coercion, and evidence tampering. His lawyers began quietly negotiating behind closed doors. Janet said nothing. Instead, she spent the next morning packing a small picnic, peach tea, a sandwich, and one of Charles's old flannel jackets. She drove alone to the cemetery at the edge of Charleston, where the Spanish moss hung like whispers over the headstones. She sat beside Charles's grave, brushing leaves from the inscription. "Everything's in your name now," she said softly, placing a hand on the cool stone. "And none of it is wasted." She read aloud the mission statement from the Foundation's new pamphlet. She told him about the keynote she was invited to give next spring, and about the girl in Savannah who'd written to say she cried when she received her first grant. "I thought I was broken," the letter had said. "But maybe I was just misnamed." Janet smiled faintly. "We're renaming things now." A breeze stirred. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to lift a corner of the jacket laid across her knees. She stayed for another hour, then folded up her lunch remains and tucked them back in her tote. Before leaving, she placed a new photo beneath the headstone vase, an image of the Charles Initiative's ribbon cutting. Her standing with the first class of recipients, arms linked, smiling like history had been corrected. As she walked back toward the car, her phone buzzed. A text from Martin. "Sentencing date to be confirmed. They're recommending restitution." Janet typed a reply. "Let them recommend what they like. I already reclaimed what matters." She paused, then hit send. Back home, she lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for grief, for grounding. Because legacy, she had learned, was not about what you leave behind. It was what you rescue before it's too late to name it yours again. The interview wasn't meant to go viral. It was supposed to be quiet. Print only, nestled in the back pages of a Sunday profile spread. A reporter from the Post and Courier, curious but not pushy, had come to Janet's home with a small notebook, a voice recorder, and a promise not to sensationalize anything. She kept her word. Almost. They sat on the porch beneath the slow-turning ceiling fan, a pitcher of iced tea between them and a Carolina wren chirping from the crepe myrtle. The reporter asked the expected questions: how it felt to be a national name in a story so intimate, how the foundation was doing, whether Janet considered herself healed. Janet had smiled at that one. "Healing isn't linear," she said. "It's architectural. You rebuild yourself with whatever you can salvage." But it was the last question that froze the afternoon in time. "What would you say," the reporter asked, "to someone who sees themselves in your son?" Janet hadn't prepared for that, but she didn't hesitate. "If you're lucky," she said evenly, "you'll never become him." It was said without malice, without theatrics, just a clean incision of truth. The reporter blinked, scribbled, and said thank you. The interview ran 3 days later, neatly formatted, respectfully worded, tucked between a column about local garden clubs and an op-ed on small business tax codes. But the quote didn't stay quiet. By nightfall, screenshots were all over social media. Someone made a minimalist graphic, her face in grayscale, the quote in stark black serif beneath. "If you're lucky, you'll never become him." It was printed on t-shirts, on protest signs, on stickers pasted to courthouse doors. Bookstores placed it near memoirs and legal handbooks. A student in Iowa used it as the title of her college application essay about parental gaslighting. Janet watched it all unfold without a trace of vanity. The phrase didn't feel like hers anymore. It had been adopted, reshaped, handed around like an heirloom of hard-won clarity. Meanwhile, Nathan's world kept shrinking. 3 companies quietly rescinded offers. A consulting agency he'd once partnered with removed his name from their roster. The startup folded. The co-founder tab on its homepage redirected to a 404, file not found. Claire finalized the divorce. She posted no photos, no hashtags, just a brief statement in Forbes Women attached to a profile on financial deception. "I believed I was building legacy. I was just laundering damage. I regret it all." She redirected her settlement payout, every cent, to the Charles Initiative, with no press announcement, just a wire transfer and a 2-word note: "Making amends." Janet didn't reach out. She didn't have to. The gesture landed like a full sentence. No reply required. By September, the first grants had been awarded. 5 women, 5 cities, each one with a folder containing not just a check, but a handwritten note from Janet. "You are not alone, not erased. Begin again." The letter was the same in every envelope, only the names changed. In October, a publisher sent a contract. A memoir, they said, they'd pay generously. Cover design already sketched. Foreign rights. Interested. Janet read the offer twice, then declined. Instead, she packed 2 suitcases, gave the Charleston condo to the foundation board, and moved into a craftsman-style home in a smaller town upstate. Mountains on the horizon, porch swing out front, and a library that still smelled like varnished oak and dust. She started teaching free creative writing classes twice a week, mostly to women, some retired, others restarting. She called the series Telling It True. It wasn't about publishing. It was about power reclaimed on the page. One Thursday evening after class, she found a note slipped into her bag. It was from a woman in her 40s, a single mom of 2, newly enrolled in community college. The note read, "Thank you for showing us that even if you raise the storm, you don't have to drown in it." Janet folded the note carefully, placed it in a drawer with the others. Just as she turned off the lights and reached for her keys, her phone lit up. A text from Martin. "Sentencing hearing date confirmed. Courtroom is requesting your statement." Janet stared at the screen. She didn't flinch, because she knew exactly what she'd say. And this time, the whole world would be listening. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Janet was finishing edits on her next writing class syllabus, Poetry and Power, an exploration of voice reclamation, when the Charles Initiative's finance coordinator forwarded it with 3 words in the subject line: "You need to see this." She opened the message. Anonymous donation. Amount $100,000. No sender listed. No note. Just a wire ID that traced back through 3 Shell accounts and a Delaware holding firm to a private settlement ledger tied to one of Nathan's former clients, an elderly man in Pennsylvania who had filed a quiet complaint years ago and never followed through. Until now, apparently. Janet sat with it for a long time. Not out of shock, but recognition. It was another kind of testimony. Silent, yes, but deliberate. A signal that the reach of Nathan's harm had been far wider than she ever realized, and maybe, just maybe, the repair could stretch just as far. She added a line to the initiative's homepage that afternoon. This work is powered by trust rebuilt, sometimes from rubble, sometimes from silence. By Friday, a call came from the National Ethics Council. Janet was being nominated for the Jameson Integrity Award, an honor usually reserved for whistleblowers, activists, or judges who'd overturned wrongful convictions. She was the first to be recognized for exposing familial fraud as a public, legal, and cultural issue. She didn't cry, but she did say thank you. The sentencing hearing was held in a federal courtroom with high ceilings and hard lighting. No soft oak benches here, just steel-backed rows, and a judge with a voice like gravel. Nathan sat with his lawyer, thinner now, suit rumpled at the collar. He didn't speak during the proceeding, but Janet did. She stood at the victim impact podium in navy once more, steady and clear, her tone unflinching. "I was never after punishment," she began. "I was after correction, after transparency. I was after the truth, not the one told to investors or cameras, but the one whispered in voicemails and buried in balance sheets." She paused. No tears. "Truth," she said slowly, "is not revenge. It's return. Return of dignity, of safety, of narrative. And that's what I took back." The courtroom held its breath. Nathan was sentenced to 5 years for identity fraud and asset theft, with mandated restitution for the liquidated funds. No possibility of early release without full cooperation in ongoing investigations. Janet didn't watch him leave the room because her gaze wasn't on what was closing, it was on what was opening. A month later, her podcast aired its final episode. Elise returned to host, but Janet took the mic one last time. The episode was titled Unmaking the Ungrateful, and it began with a single question. What happens when the people we raise forget what it took to build them? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she played voice clips from other women, mothers, sisters, caretakers, who had found the courage to confront their own stories. One said, "I thought loving him meant funding him." Another, "No more giving until I disappear." Janet ended with her own reflection. "We cannot heal what we protect from scrutiny, and we cannot reclaim what we refuse to name." The episode reached over 2 million downloads by the end of the week. In bookstores across the country, her newly published memoir, Footnotes from the Ledger, sat front and center. It climbed the bestseller list not for its salacious detail, but for its clarity, its stark, beautiful refusal to let shame win. She never did a press tour, never signed copies at airports. But once a week, she would go to the local library, slip in unnoticed, and find her own book on the shelf. She never touched it, just nodded once, then moved on. One evening in November, as the air began to crisp and dusk tucked early over the mountains, a small envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a faded photo. Nathan, maybe 6 years old, asleep in her lap on a park bench, clutching a book. No note, no signature, just the image. Janet studied it for a long moment. Then she tucked it between the pages of her teaching journal, not to remember what was lost, but to mark exactly how far she had come. Because forgiveness was no longer the goal, only truth. And she'd told hers, on every page, with every receipt. And next week, she would teach 10 more women how to do the same. The chapel was tucked between old oaks on the edge of the Blue Ridge, its whitewashed siding catching the late spring light like a held breath. The ceremony was small, no press, no fanfare, just folding chairs, hand-picked flowers, and a silence full of permission. Janet sat in the second row, just behind the mother of the bride, but this time she didn't feel excluded. She was watching Elise, her former podcast host, now mentee, now bride, walk down the aisle with a confidence Janet recognized like a mirror turned outward. A woman who had once whispered her story into a mic now stood at the center of her own life, unhidden. After the vows and the music and the soft applause, there was a modest reception under a canopy of string lights, peach tea in glass pitchers, plates of lemon cake, the scent of gardenias riding on every breeze. Elise approached her halfway through the evening, her dress slightly grass-stained at the hem, her smile wide and real. "Will you say something?" she asked. Janet hesitated, then nodded. She walked to the center of the circle where friends and chosen family had gathered, glass in hand. Her voice, when it came, needed no microphone. "Some children we raise," she said, pausing, "and others raise us back." The quiet that followed wasn't stunned. It was sacred. "I spent a long time believing motherhood was a task, a scorecard, a debt ledger. But tonight, standing here, I know better. Love is not owed, it's offered. And when it's returned freely, without coercion or shame, it writes you back into yourself." Elise teared up. So did a few others. But there was no heaviness, no clench of grief hiding in the corners, just a kind of collective exhale. For the first time in years, Janet watched a room full of people laugh without apology. Not one smile was forged through obligation. Not one conversation curled itself around image management. No one measured worth by proximity to someone else's power. It was what she'd always wanted to feel at her own son's wedding. And tonight, she did. Not because of blood, but because of truth. Later, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and the string lights blinked into their second hour of warmth, Janet walked out alone. She didn't linger for photos. She didn't wait to be escorted. She simply stepped through the grass in low-heeled shoes, the night wrapping around her like a soft cloak. Every step felt earned, every breath her own. Veronica met her at the edge of the gravel path, holding 2 wrapped sandwiches and a smile full of mischief. "Lunch at the Lookout?" Janet nodded. They drove 15 minutes to a quiet ridge where the horizon folded in on itself. They sat on a blanket, knees bent, sandwiches half unwrapped, a thermos of ginger tea between them. "You know," Veronica said, "you didn't just bury your past." Janet turned toward her, eyebrow lifted. "You resurrected your worth." Janet laughed. Not a small, self-conscious laugh, a full one, the kind that comes from being deeply known. "You should write fortune cookies," she said, "only for the vengeful." They clinked their teacups. The next morning, Janet placed a final package in the mail. A crisp first edition of her second memoir, Uninvited, A Mother's Reckoning. It wasn't as clean as the first. It was messier, bolder, unapologetic. It didn't seek sympathy. It offered warning, insight, and a map, hand-drawn, for those trying to navigate betrayal without losing their reflection along the way. The dedication was short, for those who dared to stay human in a household that demanded silence. At her next writing class, 10 women sat in a circle, notebooks open, pens poised. Some were grandmothers, some were daughters, a few were both. Janet began with a prompt. "Write the moment," she said. "You stopped apologizing for surviving." And as the pens scratched across paper, she looked out the window. No photo frames, no ghosts, just daylight, just her.